I'm Krista McAllister. Hello and welcome to Cerius Leadership. Whether you are growing your business or another area of your life you want it to be, I welcome you. I am here today with Steve Pimpo, whose career just includes a multitude of experiences from executive leadership, board member, national TV commentator, and a U.S. Navy veteran. Steve, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your service. I'm excited
My
to
pleasure.
dive into some of that,
My pleasure.
uh, and certainly to you and your family. Steve, much of your career has been spent in the military and working with consulting firms such as BDO, Accenture, Bearing Point. I can imagine some common themes across those and being able to walk into a new situation, quickly assess it, and coming up with a plan of action. Is that an accurate hypothesis?
It is. No, absolutely it is. Yes.
Is that something that you learned in the military? You learned it through the consulting firms? I'm curious as to how you developed that. You're just dropped in and you've got to figure it out quickly and act quickly.
Yeah, a little bit of both, really. I mean, when you're in the Navy, you move around to different duty stations and you show up and you have to quickly assess the current state of the command and, the corporate culture there and try to figure out how to help the organization run and operate efficiently and effectively. You've got to build trusted relationships quickly because a lot of times, especially in the military, it often is a life and death situation. And I do that several different ways. One, by asking a lot of questions. I was taught at a young age to never act like you're the smartest person in the room. And oftentimes I'm not. So that's not hard for me to do. But
I hear you.
but I do ask a lot of questions. And I don't have a problem drilling down on that because there's somebody that says once, sometimes the ease of conversation makes you think like you're connecting with somebody, but the reality of it is a lot of times you're not. So asking good questions helps you learn. I think it helps build rapport. Sometimes people wait for rapport to be built before they ask hard questions, but oftentimes it's asking those questions that really helps build rapport and showing people you care. Especially if you're coming into a situation where I want to work at the large consulting firms, sometimes there's an intimidation factor and people are like, who's this guy? Is he coming for my job? Is he going to try and, step on top of me or whatever? And I think it's really important to put people's minds at ease. I'm a huge fan of team building and operating in teams and valuing everybody on the team and finding out what their strengths are. I think one of the things that's helped me be successful is helping people play to their strengths, find out what they're really good at. Some people are really good at writing. Some people are really good at presenting. Some people are really good at doing spreadsheets, and if you can line somebody up with their talents as well as their passions, I think you've got a great recipe for success.
I'm curious because playing to those strengths, you've got to be able to learn what those strengths are and strengths that they also enjoy doing. Because sometimes we do things and we're good at them, but that is not what we want to be doing. Looking at the military, I'm guessing you switched out every 2 to 3 years and you walk in,
Right.
there's complete turnover. There may or may not easily be a handoff. You show up and the person left a month ago and you
Right.
show up
No, absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes you have great turnover files and it's, at least you can get your arms around how business was done before you got there. Sometimes it's a blind turnover and you're showing up and it's like the office lights out and it's like, okay, here you go. And you have to figure it out.
I'm always amazed at those who really do it well, and I can see how you transition so easily to dropping into corporate cultures to assess. Is it's almost like a chess board when you're stepping into a new assignment in the military. You may have 15, 20, 1,500 people. Some are coming, some are going, some are staying. How are you figuring out what's the culture of that unit? Who are the key people and what are their strengths? Was there something that you developed there or was it later on?
No, I kind of developed that early on in my career. I mean, you start to I'm kind of a student of human nature, and I like to observe. I like to watch. There's interesting elements of group dynamics, and when you see people in a group, it doesn't take too long to sort of figure out sort of who the leaders are, and start to understand what motivates them. And that's something I've always tried to do is not only build a trusted relationship with the leaders, but also people that are very junior. I mean, when I was at the big accounting firms and consulting firms, I used to often take my junior employees out to lunch and love to hear from them. Hey, what are we doing well? What can we be doing better? You know, how do you like working here? Because there's a war for talent. There always has been, especially with the big firms. They want the best and brightest, and good people will vote with their feet if they don't feel appreciated or given opportunities to grow. And so you constantly have to be, building that rapport and finding out what people really love to do and trying to find ways to marry them up with their talents and their passions.
So what would did a typical assignment look like when you went were dropped in, you went into the clients at the consulting firms? And some individuals say there's no way that someone has worked with hundreds of companies in their life. Like, well, have you worked with one of the large accounting firms? Because you go into company after company after company, and it's almost a systematic approach. What did that typically look like for you?
Yeah, sometimes it's different. I mean, oftentimes I'm working with senior leaders, whether it's the business owner, president, CEO, or when I was doing consulting work with the federal government, the program manager, the admiral, the general, whomever. I think it's really important to go in there and listen, ask good questions, listen to what they're saying, because I think you sub-optimize your ability to really help a client succeed if you go in there assuming you know what the problem is and assuming you know what the solution is. And a lot of times it's not. So I like to, typically it's a first meeting. I'll try and, build some sort of rapport through just personal connection. I'm a big fan of checking things out on the internet or LinkedIn. I think it's a shame on anybody who goes into a meeting and hasn't at least looked that person up on LinkedIn, because you can find a lot of information. Maybe you went to the same school, maybe you're from the same hometown. You certainly shared connections and or places of employment. And anything I think you can do to start to build a rapport and get those defense mechanisms down is going to help be a great building block to strengthening the relationship going forward. And then I just like to ask about, it really comes down to two things. It's Kristen, it's just like, what results are you trying to achieve, or what issues are you trying to resolve? I mean, it really kind of simply comes into one of those two buckets. We want to grow 20%, or we want to do this or that, or boy, we got a real problem with turnover, and we need to try and find a way to fix that. So it's going to come into one of those two buckets. And then, what I like to do is ask questions, kind of get a list of what the issues are, and then not ever assume the first issue they talk about is the most important. That may just come to their, attention. But I like to review those things and then have them kind of say, well, what kind of order would you put these in if you had to kind of look at it as well? Really, this fourth one, that's the one that's really, causing me a lot of problems and a lot of consternation. So let's maybe focus on that. And then try and drill down and really kind of understand, what's going on there and where they want to go.
Also, you hit on exactly where the next question I would get into, which is we know we got some problems, but what's actually causing them? And are we just stating the pain that we're in because of the problem versus the problem itself?
Yes.
How are you trying to figure out root cause versus what's causing that pain that they're in? And the pain
Yeah.
that they're in is people are leaving.
I think it really comes down to what I call peeling the onion back, asking questions, and using it as a way to dialogue with them to really kind of get inside their head. Because a lot of times a lot of people know, they just don't want to admit it, or they just want to ignore it. And,
Mhm.
that's what I try to do is dig. and dig and dig and dig until I feel like, okay, we've really unearthed all the information that we can from this particular person. And then what I like to do is try and get a list of other folks that we should be speaking with, right? Because everybody's going to give you a certain perspective. If you're coming in for consulting engagement and the leadership team knows that the president, CEO, owner is behind this, and you brought you in to help, they're typically going to be a lot more um, engaging and receptive to the interaction. And I'm always surprised at um, how open and honest sometimes people are when I start asking hard questions, and they really do. And part of it is I don't know if they're just like relieved that they have somebody they can talk to in a non-threatening environment, that they can get these things off of their chest and speak freely about things, because in a corporate environment a lot of times you can't speak honestly, right? Everything I remember, I was very conscious when I was working my way through the ranks at the big firms. And once I became a partner, managing director, I was always curious to see how the information changes as it gets further up the chain of command, right? Because everybody wants to kind of sugarcoat things and make it not seem as bad as it is. But I
Mhm.
had a boss one time who told me, Steve, bad news doesn't get any better with age. Let's get that out and tackle it head on. So,
I'm curious, you mentioned that they're more than willing to talk to you. And one of the questions we get a lot is, how do we communicate this? How do we not have everyone fearful or questioning or wondering if their jobs are at risk? I don't see that anyone in my company is going to be accepting of someone from the outside coming in and probing or asking questions.
yeah.
And you said, actually, they just can't wait to just spill the bean. They can't wait to mention anything and everything and talk about it. How is that communication? Is it coming from someone other than the CEO, or do you have kind of some communication support to really help them feel at ease and say, I'm here to help. I need you to tell me where I need to be helping.
Yeah, it really comes down to building a trusted relationship and rapport, and helping people not be defensive. Now, look,
Mhm.
I don't want to make a gross generalization. Most of the time, people are receptive and I have good conversations. There are other people, you get in the room, shields up, and they are very defensive and they don't want to have a conversation, and you're not going to get a lot of information out of them. But by and large, I like to try and put people at ease. And if we're all working toward the greater good, then if people are really engaged, then I think they want to try and help be part of the solution. Now, a lot of times people aren't engaged; they're checked out. They're like, "Hey, I hate working here. I'm going to leave the first chance I get. The only reason I'm here is the money's good, and but boy, I'm going to do the minimum to get by, and I'm out." And those people typically are the ones that really aren't going to engage. They have their own agenda. It's like Collins talks about making sure you have the right people on the bus, right? I mean, maybe some of those people are the people that should be leaving because they aren't helping move the company along. They're just sort of an anchor, and they're there going through the motions, doing the minimum to get by. And they've been smart enough to keep it that way so other people can't figure it out. But what I found is, by and large, um, people kind of know who the high performers are and who the people are that don't perform. And it doesn't take long to figure that out, especially in the big firms. Very competitive. When you go into various different organizations, there's certain pockets where people might be able to hide and sort of sub-optimize their ability to help the company grow and be successful. But for the most part, once you have that momentum going forward, I think a lot of those people will either leave on their own, or they'll get found out and the pressure will be put on them to either leave, or you have to let them go.
One of those things that we find from uh, that assessment and being able to gather the information, you do all the interviews, you've got your recommendations, is everyone that's been interviewed and has shared, they really want to know, now what?
Yeah.
What do you recommend to your clients to then, here's now how we communicate the results of the information. Obviously, it's based on the audience, and there's different audiences inside the organization. As you mentioned, each time you
Mhm.
move up in management, the communication is a little different. How do you go about helping to circle back? And whether it's performance, or whether it's I know some companies do the Gallup survey. Sometimes they'll bring in consultants to assess, and then the employees hear nothing. It's like crickets. How important is that to circle back and share?
I think it's really important. Again, if I'm brought on to a consulting engagement, the president, the CEO, I mean, they're our client. So, I mean, if they want the information to reside with them only, then it's really not our position to force their hand. But a lot of times when I'm working on projects like that, I will encourage them to, hey, here's our final report. This is what we found. This is where we see some gaps. This is where we think you need to go. We'll anonymize the data. And because last thing we want to do is somebody tells us something that's really important, and we don't want them to get in trouble for that or get let go for that. But it was a critical piece of information that was like, okay, yeah, this is the big elephant in the room, and everyone knows it's there, but no one wants to talk about it. And so that's what I've done in the past is, create some sort of a readout. And typically there's two versions, right? There'll be one version where I'll meet with the president and CEO and everything's there, right? And then what we'll typically do is, all right, if we're going to go out and brief the leadership team or whatever, there'll be maybe a more sanitized version that's a little bit more digestible just because, look, we're working for the business owner and the president or CEO. They have the right to have all the information. What we want to do with the rest of the team is help them understand, hey, here's what we found, here's what we did, and here's the way forward. And so that everybody can get on board and understand why they brought these guys in, why we spent all this money, why we took time from our busy schedules to meet with them. And oh, okay, those are some pretty good observations. Oh, I like those ideas of how we might be able to improve our, turnover rate or our growth in this industry or our innovation or whatever. So that's what I've tried to do, and I think has been successful over the years.
It's interesting. We hear a lot from about having someone come in from the outside is no one knows my business better than I do. What are they going to tell me that I don't know already?
Yeah, and that's fair assessment a lot of times, and sometimes I'll even leave with that. It's like, look, I don't know your business better than you do. You know it better than I do. But what I can do is come in and provide an objective outside set of eyes and give you some feedback that maybe you're missing. It's like when you first go into a building or a room, or let's say you go to an office, right? And when you first go into that office, you may notice there's a crack in the ceiling, that the window's got a little bit of a fade on it, that there's a chair in there that's kind of, run down. After you're there for 6 months to a year, you don't even think about it, right? But it was that fresh, quick initial look where you were observant and saw those things. Or it's like we live in by an airport, right? When you first move in, you're like, gosh, the airplanes are coming all over the place. And then after a while, that sound just doesn't even bother you, until you have a friend or a relative come over. It's like, man, you guys have a lot of airplanes flying over your house. I'm like, I guess, yeah, I didn't notice that.
You just go numb to it after a while. I love that analogy. It's like I worked with a AV company, and they did some of the most amazing audiovisual build outs you can imagine. But you walk into their conference room, and there's wires everywhere. The video system isn't hooked up,
Oh
and
gosh.
you just don't, because you get so wrapped up. And they're aware of it, but it's we'll get to it after our next project.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll get to it. And there really isn't anyone dedicated to solve for it or
right.
dedicated to own that process. So as you map out, here's our recommendations, here's how you can solve it. Are you then working with an internal champion to say, now let's go through the solution process, let's get this executed on? Or is that something that you typically own?
It's both. I've found, again, it depends on the organization and the culture of the company. I think any kind of change is hard, and you really have to have some sort of an internal champion, whether it's a business owner or it's senior leadership, or one person or several people that are getting behind that. Because if it's all on the consultant to execute all the change and build new processes and help train people and do other things, and leadership's not behind that, it's going to fail miserably. I would be straight up to tell them and say, hey, look, unless we've got this sort of representation and this sort of support, it's probably not worth us trying to move ahead on this. Because what's going to happen is people are just going to anger at us, and then they'll be like, you know what? I don't need to listen to you. I got a job to do. I get measured on, how many things I sell, or how much coding I do in a day, or whatever. And so again, metrics drive behavior. And so if you've got the wrong metrics in place, then you're going to drive bad behavior. But if part of the metric is, hey, we're putting a new thing on board, you got to be a part of the solution. Well, then that's going to obviously be important to people to kind of get engaged.
Wherever we put our focus is where everyone pays attention to.
Exactly.
Whether you're measuring it or you're communicating it. That's how do you find, I'm always curious on feedback loops and communication loops. That's one of the big areas that I see companies struggling with is, yes, we made a change. We put in a new bonus program. We did something for our employees and we had a big all hands meeting and we communicated it. What else have you done since then? Well, nothing. We
Yeah.
communicated it. They heard it. What are some things that you work with companies on, or recommendations for how to create a feedback loop to make sure that they heard it? Because you even mentioned as you go through each layer of the organization, and especially if you have some remote or field employees or multi-locations, that messaging changes.
Yes. Yeah, I think you have to have follow-up is important. I remember one project we did where we were helping individual elements of the company put together kind of call plans and business plans for improving their engagement with potential clients. And we gave them a template. We walked through, what does this look like when it's done well? And then we'd meet with them every 3 weeks. And how are we doing? How's the progress going? And I think when somebody knows that they're being held accountable by an outside agency, it just gives them enough motivation to not blow it off and show up on the call that, hey, sorry, I didn't get to that. When they've got their other peers on there as well, it's like, what do you mean you didn't get to that? This is kind of an important thing. And I mean, I wouldn't talk to them like that. I'm just thinking that's what I'm thinking in my mind. And so, peer pressure helps, follow-up helps. I think if there are ways to get feedback from folks, I think you have to create an environment where it's not bad to give feedback and there's no repercussions for feedback. I've been part of organizations that have done like anonymous 360 type feedback stuff. The only problem with that is sometimes sometimes you get some real biting feedback from people, if it's like, they're going after leadership and they've just always wanted to vent. And so through this cloak of anonymity, now they can really be kind of angry and not feel any kind of repercussion. So it's a tough challenge trying to get honest feedback, but then also, creating an environment where people aren't going to feel attacked either.
We find when you do those 360s, it's kind of similar to the annual performance assessment is we've got it built up all year long. And now we're doing it this once in it's almost a petri dish of what's most recent on our mind, what's happened in the last month versus creating that ongoing. And I like your whether it's every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or monthly, there's some type of a meeting where the purpose of it is to talk about where we're at, where we're not there, what are the bottlenecks, how can we help? And there's that saying of be hard on the process, not the people.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And I'll tell you, when I was a senior executive at the big firms, I mean, I would be real hard on my managers that, when it came time for annual performance reviews, we would set objective metrics. And it's during that performance review, it's not the time to bring up something bad that somebody did 6 months ago and hammer them with it. It's like if somebody made a mistake, you need to keep short accounts. You need to have a conversation. Look, I needed you to get this spreadsheet done by 3 o'clock today. You didn't get it done. What that meant was I had to get somebody else to do it. I had to be late for my meeting, and we were able to do that. And hold short accounts. And I would get upset with my folks if they ended up waiting a long time, or we'll deal with that during performance review. No, you're not. You need to deal with that when it right happens, because your job is to help train, mentor, and guide your employees, as well as trying to make an effective and high performing team. And mistakes in and of themselves aren't bad. It's bad if you make a mistake and you don't learn from it and you make the same mistake again and again and again. So again, creating an environment where people can make mistakes, learn from their mistakes, get feedback from leadership in a timely fashion so that they can take that information and now be better. And it makes the whole team better.
That's one of the common themes that I see of someone who has had a career in the military, regardless of the length of that career. My husband spent 20 years in the military. And
Right.
that ability, I saw it during COVID, my son's homework, he didn't write it legibly, it was erased, write it again. Not legible, erase it, write it again. And I said, where did you learn that? Military, you do it over and over and over on the spot until you get it right. We don't wait until we're doing their annual, what is it, a fit
Right.
rep? Am I getting
Yeah.
that correct? You don't
Yeah.
wait until then, you correct it on the spot, and then what you're doing is you're actually evaluating them on their ability to learn, their
Yes.
ability to take that coaching, not on did they make a mistake to begin with.
Yeah. Well, look, nobody's perfect, right? And we're all going to make mistakes. And the key is just, and sometimes they're honest mistakes, sometimes they're careless mistakes.
Mhm.
And regardless, if a mistake was made and it impacted the business or the mission or whatever, you have to help people learn and get better.
I love seeing it as this is a training opportunity. That's all it is.
Yeah.
The concept of being able to train managers to actually lead their teams is just such a core principle that I think if we all spent more time in that area, I think every company would just skyrocket in their performance. It's got to be one of the biggest opportunities for improvement in companies. As you have transitioned, you've worked in the military, you've worked in the big four. I know you also step into small to mid-sized companies and help them as interim and fractional leadership. Do you see some of the same trends and patterns and using the same platform and systematic approach, or does it get adjusted?
No, I see a lot of the same things, and especially in like small to medium sized businesses. One of the things that my former business partner and I actually wrote an article. We had a business owner that talked about feeding the beast. And what does that mean? Well, this leader was the, best at marketing, the best at proposal writing, the best HR person, the best delivery person. They didn't take the time to train their management team because it takes time to do that. It's an investment to train
Yeah.
other people and to get them up to the standards that you would have. But as a business owner, by training that next level of leadership, you really free yourself up to be much more strategic. But you have to train people up in a way and then trust them to do the right thing. And then once you've got that kind of an organization, and I think that's something that I think the military drives into people because you've got to trust your people, and you've got to, especially if you have a vast organization, you have to trust people to go out and do that. You can't run it all yourself. And so that's one of the biggest, I think, challenges I see with small to medium-sized companies where the owners used to doing everything themselves because that's one person. Now we have two people. Now we have three people. Now we have 10 people. Okay. Well, you're still doing all those different things, right? And there comes a point where it's like, look, hey, you're the CEO of this company. You don't need to be the person on LinkedIn or Monster looking for employees. That's Yeah, you're good at it. Yeah, you're like doing it maybe, but that's not the best use of your time. But, if you want somebody to do that for you, you have to take the time and say, okay, these are the kind of qualities I'm looking for. These are the kind of skills I'm looking for. These are the kinds of, extracurricular activities that I think are interesting for a person in our business or whatever. And then you've got now freed up your time to allow somebody else, and that person's going to feel like they're contributing more to the company as well. So it's not just a one-way street. It's not, hey, I need you to do this so I can be freed up to be more strategic as a business owner. It's like, no, look, I trust you. I want to bring you into the leadership team. And one of the things I need you to do is you need to be our person that's looking for new people to come in here, or whatever the task is, billing and collecting, proposal writing. When I was at the big firms, we used to take junior people and train them in the proposal process. One of the first things we'd have them do, there would be a request for proposal out, and they would want key personnel, and these are the qualifications. So I would take junior analysts and have them take resumes and tailor those to the actual RFP. And it was an easy way for them to come in, learn, because they would sit in all the meetings. So they saw how the players were, how we organized the proposal, how we actually went about putting that all together and putting win themes out so people could write in various areas, and then we bring it all together and it's all connected. But their actual job is, hey, you're going to do resumes. And so another junior person would teach them what kind of the standards were, how to do that. And then eventually they would get more responsibility and more responsibility. And I think people that, again, if you're an engaged employee, you want to grow with the company and you want to have some upward mobility, but people need to teach you that in order for you to be able to be successful.
There's a saying, always be developing your talent. You're always doing business development. You're always developing your talent. And there is that mind trap often. Been there myself. That's why I'm so aware of the different strategies for passing on what you do, because you really shouldn't be the one doing it anymore. Just because we're the best at it doesn't mean we should be the one doing it. And sometimes we're the best at it because we're the only one who has ever done it.
Right, right.
No one else has ever tried. And we're the best at doing it our way. It doesn't mean that our way is the best way.
Right, right, right.
And that's a very big mental shift. I think as we start to see the knowledge era, we see AI, we see a lot of shifts in how we do things. We've had the digital age to figure out why. Now we've got the how we do things. It's such an opportunity for leadership to pass on some of what they do and say, how would you do this?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a brilliant thing. I play a lot of golf. And so the analogy I use is, when I was training my management team, you know, it might not be right in the fairway, but it's in the first cut of rough, and that's good enough for me, because they've taken what I've taught them and they've put their sort of spin on it. And is it getting the job done? Yes. Is it meeting the standards? Yes. Is it exactly how I would have done it? No. But that's okay, because at the end, they're going to make sure that that's actually going to get done, and it's going to get done successfully, and it's fine. And it's not worth micromanaging people over to make sure it's done exactly the way I'm going to do it, unless it's something that really has to be done exactly that way. We're working on a piece of machinery or something like that. Well, you can't over tighten that bolt, even if you're really strong and you want to feel like you're really strong. That's just, that tolerance has to be exact. So
what are some recommendations as you step in and you're helping leaders elevate either we got problems, we need to fix them, we need to not have these problems anymore, or results, we want to improve something? And I think either way, there's outcomes. Here's where I'm at, here's where I want to be, either not in pain or I want to be better than I'm at today. And as you're helping them assess that, you're seeing some things that need to shift and change, including some of ownership's behaviors. And I always raise my hand on that. So I'm speaking to myself in the process. I always say these conversations are almost more therapeutic for me than anyone else. Steve, I don't know. I love these discussions. What are some of those first steps in walking an owner through that process of what should you be doing, what shouldn't you be doing? If you want to get to here, here's some of our own behaviors that we're going to want to change.
yeah.
That's a big psychological shift for me personally.
Yes, yes. And I think it all comes down to really understanding what their goals are, and understanding if the things they're spending time doing, is that helping them optimize their ability to lead the company toward those goals? Because there's only so many hours in a day, and you really have to be able to delegate responsibilities and delegate jobs and things like that. So it's important to understand where they want to go, and are they spending the correct amount of time trying to achieve that goal, or are they getting distracted by other things that they don't need to do? So I'll have that conversation and I'll start finding out relatively quickly, are they spending their time in the right areas? And if they are doing things that maybe I would think that they maybe shouldn't, I'm going to ask, well, why are you spending so much time doing this? Oh, well, I'm the best at it, or I really like it. It's like, okay, yeah, you might like it and you might be the best at it, but you got to be the best as the CEO and the owner. And in order for you to get from point A to point B, here's the things that you're going to need to lead your company through in order to get there. And in order to have the time to do that, you're probably not going to be able to do this other thing, or at least not do it as often as you're doing right now. And so through the conversations and asking questions, I'll uncover what some of the issues are. And then we prioritize things and try and figure out a way ahead in such a way that's going to help the owner, optimize their time, do the things that they really need to do in order to help their company grow, or stop doing something that they were doing to avoid a problem, and then kind of create a plan to do that.
In that plan, do you help to kind of buffer or help the transition from the owner to identify who in the company is the right person? Let's get them developed and trained. Or is there an opportunity sometimes for you to say, these three things, let me do them. Let me get them off your plate. Let's show this alternative reality of what your life can be like without these.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's both. I mean, I've been in a position where I've helped identify employees in an organization that's like, look, you're underutilizing this person. They've got a lot more leadership skills than you are willing to admit. They're well organized. They're well thought of. They may have come into the company as a young person, and now they've been there 10 years, and people still think they're that young person. And so that's one thing I've done. And in a situation where I'm a fractional C-suite person, then I can go ahead and take some of those responsibilities off their plate and actually do those. It really depends on the nature of the engagement, right? If I'm coming in to do a project as an outside consultant, probably I'm going to make more recommendations. If I'm in the organization as an interim or fractional executive, then some of those I'll volunteer to just go ahead and take them and move out.
And you mentioned it takes time to train. So maybe that as that interim or fractional, you're able to do the training, you're able to do the handoff, as it really doesn't take much sometimes for an experienced executive to just take it off of owner's plate and figure it out and get it done. It's that training and that repetitiveness of, did they understand it? Let's do that check-in at 2 weeks. Let's do a weekly meeting at first. Let's do that at the feedback loop of, is it going the way we need it to do? Or now that someone else is doing it, do we need to adjust the process?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And look, here's the deal. I mean, I think every company's different, but there are only a finite amount of like business issues, right? And you can kind of box that in. And having been in the business for over 30 years, I mean, there aren't a lot of new things that I encounter that I haven't seen some version of that, either when I was in the military or working with government clients or working with larger or smaller clients. It just sort of has a different look to it. But over time, it's like, oh, I've seen this story before.
It leads me to the next question on, what do you see sometimes as the biggest opportunity when you step into an organization, and regardless whether you're consulting, intern, fractional, you're stepping in and there's some real low hanging fruit. Do you see some commonalities or some trends to 9 out of 10 times I start with this one or two? because
Yeah,
it's
I
so
mean,
easily missed.
it's just what we talked about. The biggest one I see is the development of your leadership team.
Mm.
And the business owner taking the time to train those people to have consistent feedback and interaction with them, because the more you invest in those folks, the better they're going to be, the more you can trust them, the more it frees you up to do the things you need to do to be a strategic leader and thinker. I always used to tell my managers, your job is to sort of manage yourself out of a position. I mean, you want to have this organization running so well that you've got the ability to now think more strategically, go out and develop more business, take on additional challenges. And you can't do that if you've got to constantly micromanage your team and reset the course because they haven't done things correctly.
What's some typical advice that you give? I always like to ask, what advice would you give a business owner that is struggling with some challenges? They've tried to solve it over and over again, or they're looking for that next revenue level. And you and I know how hard it is to get you plateau it, and then you've got to jump up to that next step. In some initial discussions that you have, what is some advice that you give beyond maybe what we've just discussed, or double down on it?
Companies sometimes get into this, you call it no man's land, right? They're too big to be small, too small to be big. And the organization that took them to maybe 30 or 50 million is probably not going to be what's going to help them get to 100 million. So I think people have to take a look at the people they have on board and their internal processes, to make sure that those can scale to the size that they're going to need to be. It's really difficult too, because I mean, you may have started your company with your, college roommate who is an accounting major, and they're your sort of controller, and they've grown with you to the company. But, now you're a 50, $75 million company, and you've grown beyond the capacity of that person to really be effective. And you kind of need to maybe help that person understand that, hey, if you've reached your plateau, and I appreciate everything you've done, might still be able to keep you with the organization, but we need to hire a CFO, and a CFO who knows this and this and this, because you and I both know you don't have that capability. Sometimes people are receptive to that. If they're self-aware, they can understand, yeah, you know what? I'm really not that person. You're right. I don't have those skills. Or they'll get defensive and, hey, I've been through thick and thin with you. Now you're going to go ahead and, treat me like that. So it's not easy, but I think taking a look at the people you have is very important, and their capabilities, their loyalty. I mean, loyalty is great, but sometimes it blinds people to a lack of capability, and your processes. Hey, are you doing things in the most efficient and effective way that's going to allow you to scale and get to the next level? And that's where I think an outside set of eyes is helpful to come in and sort of take a look at things. It's like, oh, we've always done it this way. Okay, but yeah, but have you ever thought about doing it like this, or doing it like this, or why do you do this? I mean, I remember we had a client, it was a government client, and every month these monthly reports had to be done, and you had a new leader come in and just kind of asked, well, why are we doing these monthly reports? It's like, well, we've always done that. Well, and the new leadership team didn't want the report. They didn't even read them, but these guys are wasting their time putting spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides and all this stuff together for this monthly report that was no longer being used. So human nature is funny. People don't like to change, and most people like routine. And so when you get the engine running, it's like, okay, this is the way it goes, but sometimes you have to take a look at that and see, is it really going in the right direction?
I love the question of, why are we doing this? And is this going to get us to the outcome? And I love that we talk about the plateau and that self-awareness. What was the value that I was to the company 5 years ago? What is my value today? And what is my value to it need to be 5 years from now? And always like that past, present, and future, because you hit on it basically. If you're not breaking something in your company, you're not building it. You should always be working to break something in the company, hopefully with the plans on when it does break or right before it breaks, here's what we're going to transition to, and here's the depending on your risk investment tolerance. Steve, thank you so much for your advice, your experience, and I know that we just took 30 years of experience and put it into one show here, so we're probably going to need to have a follow-up. I made a few notes here that I think can be whole separate discussions on, at the ownership level. How do you have those conversations on what should we be doing now versus what we have been? How do we replace ourselves in that way? Because it's counterintuitive. That's how the company builds value, is it can replace its leadership and ownership. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your stories, Steve. I'm sure we will have another conversation. And thank you for joining us on Cerius Leadership.
Thanks so much, Chris. And it was great to be here. I enjoyed the conversation and look forward to the next time we get to speak.
Thank you, Steve.